And now we'll find participants. Oh, there we are. Mute all. Is that right there? Okay. All right.
Yes.
Yes, got it. Okay. All right. So
Debbie's back. Debbie's back. She's back.
Debbie, welcome back. Debbie, I see, is back with us now. To all of you, welcome back. We are now in session number 4 of a 6-week course, which means we are 2/3 after tonight. We will be 2/3 the way finished with our discussion of the book of Leviticus. Remember how we got here. I'm not going to go through a long discussion. I said to you, the book of Leviticus was a book about teaching us how to be holy. In Jewish life, our purpose is to learn how to live lives of holiness. As Jews, there is a program for that, and that program is contained in the Torah, and a good portion of that program is found in the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus explains how an entire people, an entire nation, can learn to be holy. Remember, God said to the Jewish people at Sinai, you are to be a nation unto me, you are to be a holy nation, a goy kadosh, you are to be a kingdom of priests, and God is going to democratize holiness. He's going to say, all people, not just priests, all people are capable of living a holy life. And therefore, the Torah will describe to the Jewish people the processes, the laws, the patterns, the ways in which they are to live lives of holiness. So that is what the book of Leviticus is about. And in our first session, we talked in general about the concept of holiness. What is holiness? Holiness very simply means to bring God into the world. God, who created us, who limited himself and brought human beings, imperfect creatures, into the world, he then turned to us and said, okay, now your job, you imperfect human creatures, is to bring me back into the world. So our job is to take a world that God has created a space for us to live in and to bring God back into the world. How do we do that? By practicing the laws of holiness. And we talked about many different laws of holiness, but this semester I've decided to concentrate on what I consider to be the big three, the three major areas of holiness that traditional Jews use to begin to educate themselves to live a holy life. The first two sessions we had dealt with the holiness of time. How can we find God in time, and how can we bring God into our world, the world of space and time? How do we in our lives bring God into that world? By sanctifying time. And we talked about Shabbat, and we talked about the holidays as opportunities that give us the opportunity to meet God in the world, to sanctify moments that we spend with one another and with God, how we can take ordinary, regular time and turn it into a holy experience where we can confront the divinity. Last week and this week, we're going to look at another way in which we can bring God and holiness into our lives, not through the calendar, not through the celebration of Shabbat and the holidays, but through our eating. And I told you last week, eating is something that every animal does. It's not unique to human beings. Every creature that needs nourishment, animal or non-animal, requires certain things in order to live. And that nourishment that an individual takes in, that is what we identify as nutrition or diet. Jews and people in general, human beings in general, need to eat. And we discussed last time a lot of reasons why we need to eat: nutrition, life, health. There are a lot of reasons why food is necessary. But last week I asked a question. I said, what determines not only why we eat obviously for very apparent reasons, but what determines what we don't eat? People who decide not to eat certain kinds of things, who decide to go on special kinds of diets, what determines what these people will choose to consume or not consume? And you'll remember from last week And we talked about health reasons for why we eat or don't eat what we do, medical reasons. We talked about the difference between natural and processed foods. We talked about environmental factors, given the limitations in our environment, what kinds of food should we be eating? What kinds of food should we not be indulging in? We talked about cultural factors. We talked about aesthetic factors. We talked about ethical factors. And finally, we ended by talking about religious factors. So, having done all of that, I want to speak to you this week about not just diets in general, but the diet that is most clearly associated with Judaism and the Jewish people. And we call this kashrut. Kashrut is just the Hebrew word, which means proper or fit. And it describes the religious diet, the foods that we as Jews are allowed to or not allowed to eat, and the way in which we are supposed to eat them. In other words, not just the foods themselves, but the entire manner of eating. We can turn what is essentially a physical or animal act, we can turn that into a holy act by what we eat and how we eat. We can take the act of nutrition and make it into an experience where we encounter God. Now, let me begin this week by getting rid of two wrong notions about kashrut. Many of you probably have heard in the past, well, you'll say, Rabbi, we know why we observe kashrut. There are two reasons that are traditionally cited for why we eat kashrut to explain the origin of the custom of the Jewish dietary laws. I will tell you as we begin, both those reasons are wrong, okay? So I'm not going to ask you what the reasons are. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but both of the traditional reasons for which have been given for why we keep kosher are wrong reasons. And they're actually reasons that were given by people who wanted to explain why they didn't have to keep kosher anymore, okay? They said, yeah, at one time the dietary laws made sense and there was a reason for us to observe these restrictions. But nowadays, in a more modern age, when we're more enlightened, when we know more about nutrition and disease, these two ancient reasons don't apply anymore. So the two reasons that I'm going to cite to you are reasons, they're kind of straw men. They're the reasons that Jews give, or other people, Jews give, for not keeping kosher. If I don't want to keep kosher, how do I not do away with it? By explaining it in such a way that I said, these were the original reasons, but now it's not necessary anymore. Therefore, we don't have to follow the reasons. So let me give you the two wrong reasons, okay, for why we keep kosher. The first says it is an ancient religious taboo that goes back to pre-Judaism times. Now, let me explain what I mean. That many religions, as you go back in history, and this is true, many religions have taboos that govern the foods that a person can eat and the foods that a person is not supposed to consume, okay? And they explain this in terms of religion, okay? Why can't we consume certain kinds of food? Why are certain animals not permitted to us? Why are other animals allowed? Well, the answer these people who suggest this reason say it has to do with ancient religion. And we who are more sophisticated anymore, and we who don't believe that sanctity is governed by what we put in our mouth, but it's really governed by what comes out of our mouth, the way we speak and the way we act, they say there's no need to follow those ancient rules anymore. They are quite simply wrong. They are incorrect. Now, let me, without just dismissing it, explain to you where it comes from. The earliest religions in the world were not monotheistic. Judaism is what we call a monotheistic faith, as is Christianity and Islam, which means we believe in the existence of one God who created the entire world, who created all things, and that this God is unopposed in the world, that this God has brought everything into existence, which is capable of being either good or bad, depending on how we utilize it. There is no inherent good or bad, except in terms of how we treat it. Remember when God creates the world in 6 days. After each day of creation, God looks at what he creates, light and darkness, the heavens that divide the upper waters and the lower waters, the land and the sea. After each stage of creation, God looks at it and says, and God saw that it was good. So anybody who thinks that God created evil in the world has got a problem, Jewishly speaking. Judaism believes that everything God creates is good. There is no opposition in nature, almost a kind of a war that exists between those forces that support God and those forces that oppose God. But in ancient religions, there was such a belief. Now, I'm not going to go over, I'm going to send you a document. I was going to send it to you before tonight, but I thought our discussion would be better if I explain it to you first, and then you can read the text. It's from a very important writer named Nechama Leibovitz, who explains the dietary laws in a wonderful way. But basically, the idea goes like this, and you can hear this reflected by other people as well. Both ancient Jewish commentators talk about it and reject it, or modern people talk about it and reject it. But here's the way it goes. In the earliest religions, there was not one God, okay? There were multiplicities of gods. Every aspect of nature had its divinity that supervised it. But generally speaking, going back to the earliest religions, there was a counter view to Judaism, which existed before Judaism, that said the world isn't created by one unified God. The world is created by two forces, a God of good and a God of evil. Now, some of you think we're away that doesn't exist anymore. In a way, it still does. This idea of God is only responsible for good in the world, but evil must come from some kind of demigod or some kind of a counterforce. This still exists in the world today. Judaism maintains that God creates all things and that good or evil is not inherent in God's plan. Good or evil is inherent in how we use the things that God makes available to us. But one of the early forms of actually pre-Zoroastrian is the idea of duality, that there is not one God in the world, and there may be multiple gods, but basically you can define the gods or God into two forces, a God of light and good, or a God of darkness and evil, okay? This is a Zoroastrian theology, that there are two co-equal gods in the world, or almost co-equal. One is the God of good, and he creates everything in the world that we know is good, and everything that is blessed is created by this one God. That which we identify as evil, either human beings or evil in the world in general, was not created by God, because God is incapable of doing anything bad. God, by his nature, only creates good things. Therefore, everything that we identify in the world as sinful or evil or counter to the force of goodness must have its own deity that created it. And this deity must be the God of evil. Now, in most of these dualistic systems, the God of good is given a little bit more power than the God of evil. Okay, I'm saying that they're two equal forces. They're really not. In most of these dualistic religions, it is believed that in the battle between the God of light and the God of darkness, eventually the God of light will prevail. Okay, so the happy news is that the God of light or the God of good is stronger than the deity of evil, and that eventually, either with human help or without human help, the God of light will prevail and the God of darkness, of evil, will be destroyed. Okay, this is a doctrine we identify today, what we call it Zoroastrianism or Manichaeism, and it is still found among some people who believe, for example, that everything that is good in the world today is caused by a power of goodness, God, and that everything that is evil and that subdues us in the world is caused by a counterforce to God, not as powerful. And they call this counterforce Satan or the devil or whatever you want to call it. In other words, God can't possibly be responsible for evil. Where did evil come from? God created a good world. There was a counterforce in the world that competes with God to win the influence in the world, to win the souls of human beings. And this counterforce is what we identify as Satan or the evil spirit or the devil, or however you want to call it. Essentially, what it says is there is a great battle going on in the world between God and Satan. or between, I'll give you the other names in a second, and that we human beings are kind of like pawns in this battle. Think about it. You're given a choice. You can side with either the good guys or the bad guys, the white hats or the black hats, so to speak. But the choice is yours. If you side with the white hats, that's good. You side with the powers of light. But if you decide, or if in your weakness you end up siding with the forces of temptation or evil or sin, you're going to wear a black hat. You're selling your soul to the dark powers, okay? And both the powers of light and the powers of darkness are competing with each other to win your soul. So your soul is a battleground. Everybody get it? Your soul is the battleground in this world in which the forces of goodness and the forces of evil are competing with one another. And based on your free choice, will either be subdued or seduced or caught up in either the good or evil, and that you really have very little influence over it. You're really just a plaything in the hands of these divine forces. Judaism does not believe that. Okay, I think that's clear enough for those of you who've been with me for a while. There are not two forces in the universe. Not only are gods not multiple, gods are not dualistic. They're not two. There's not a force of good and a force of evil in the world. If you think that way, you're not thinking Jewishly. The entire world created by God is good. When God finishes the world on the sixth day of creation, it says, and God saw all that he created, and behold, it was tov me'od, very good. Okay, so for those of you who think that God creates evil, you're going to have to explain to me how God at the end of creation sees everything he creates and looks at it and determines that everything he's created is not only good, it's very good. And then, of course, the question comes in, well, if God created a good world, where does evil come from, right? And there are two answers. Either evil is a powerful force that opposes God spiritually, or evil is our responsibility, that as free human beings, we create evil. I would like to tell you that, well, I wouldn't like to tell you, but it would be easy for me to tell you that evil isn't your fault. To quote Flip Wilson, the devil made me do it, okay? I didn't do it, the devil made me do it. In other words, whenever I do something wrong, whenever I use my free will to make a choice that is contrary to the will of God, it's not my fault, the devil made me do it. That may get me off the hook, but it's not a Jewish answer, okay? The truth is God gave you the power to choose between following God's law or not, between choosing the good or choosing the evil. It's rather like that. Remember the old pictures where the person in the movie, two figures appear on his shoulders. One is the devil and one is an angel, and they're each whispering into his ears, "Go ahead, do it. You know you want to do it. That's okay. It won't matter." And the other saying, remember, God said. That's a kind of simplistic and very naive way of saying we know good and we know evil. We know what is right and we know what is wrong. And even though we will try and rationalize why we accept the evil or choose the wrong in place of the right, the truth of the matter is the decision is in our hand. We control the decision. And therefore, this ancient Manichaean Zoroastrian doctrine is not correct. By the way, just to give you a little background, and this will be in the material I will send you. The god of evil in Zoroastrian theology is called Ahura Mazda or Ormuzd. Okay, he is the god of light. He is the God of goodness. He is the God of blessing, who bestows nothing but good upon the world. And his counterpart, the God of darkness, the God of evil, the God of misfortune, he is a figure called Ahriman, and he is the God of darkness and evil and everything bad that exists in the world. And human beings and everything else in the world merely are being utilized by these two powerful forces. And our job is to serve the God of light and to defeat the God of darkness. Now, I tell you that this is not the reason for kashrut. By the way, how do you say to me, all right, how does this relate to kashrut? Well, I'll tell you. It was believed that certain creatures were created. I'm going to read this now to you. Let me get my glasses here. The distinction was made between the clean and unclean beasts of the earth. and it may be traced back to the ancient religious traditions, especially that of Zoroastrianism. The conflict between the God of light and the God of evil exists in the world. The creations or the creatures that were created by the God of light are pure and holy, while those of the God of darkness and evil are unclean and abominable. Okay? What do I mean unclean and abominable? It means that in Zoroastrianism, the clean beasts are created by the God of light, and those beasts should be protected and they're beneficial to you and they can only do you good. But the beasts that were created by the God of darkness cannot be eaten. Not only shouldn't they be eaten, they shouldn't be touched. Not only that, they should not be protected. They should be hunted down and destroyed. And whatever you do, you must avoid contact with these creatures that were created by the God of evil, and you must only enjoy those creatures that were created and protected by the God of good. Okay? That's the theological substance about it. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through all the religions and why Hindus don't eat cow. I mean, but basically, the original idea was there are certain things that are taboo that you do not eat because it is on the dark side. It's the dark side of, and then there are the things that are on the side of the force, the good side, that's okay to eat. Okay. If you believe that, and some people believe this was the origin of food taboos, you will not understand Judaism because Judaism does not believe that. Yes, there are certain animals that are permitted, certain animals that are forbidden, but it has nothing to do with them being either created by the God of goodness or the God of darkness. It has nothing to do with about something inherent in the animal itself, which makes it pure or permissible or impure and abominable. Doesn't exist. The dietary laws which govern what can be eaten and what is prohibited from being eaten, they do exist, but it has nothing to do with a balance between the powers of light and the powers of darkness. So anybody who tells you that Judaism is just a more modern version of ancient religions that had religious taboos based on powers of goodness and powers of evil is absolutely wrong. Okay? And you will read accounts, believe me, I have seen them. You will read accounts where it will be said that Judaism is just a later version and a more attempt to moralize what were originally religious taboos based on superstition and based on religious dualism between a battle between good and evil in the world. If you think that's what Judaism is, you're wrong. We know that it's wrong because the Torah tells us God created everything, that they created it good. The Torah tells us that only the Jewish people and not the world is restricted according to certain rules. Most people are allowed to eat things that in the world that Jews cannot. It doesn't have to do with the fact that the Jews follow the power of the God of light and the rest of the world follows the power of the God of darkness. That's not it. Okay. Jews, because of their vocation of being a holy people and their attempt to serve as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, must adhere to a certain regimen, a certain ritual, a certain way of eating. And while there are reasons for that, it has nothing to do with religion. Okay. So if you say to me, Rabbi, does God really say that certain animals aren't kosher because they're despicable and they're cursed and this and that and the other? I say no. And I can't explain to you on the basis of religion, that kind of religion, why pork should be prohibited, or why shellfish should be prohibited, or why animals that do not part the hood from chew the cud, wild animals, why they should be prohibited. It is nothing inherent in the animals in themselves or the world itself that says these animals are permissible and these animals are off limits. If you look for that, you will be disappointed. Okay, so that's the first mistake. The second mistake, which is more common among Jews, has to do with what I call the hygienic motivations for eating. Hygienic motivations for eating. And once again, these reasons are given by Jews who no longer keep kosher anymore. Let me see if I can make the argument. In ancient times, certain kinds of foods or certain kinds of animals or certain kinds of eating or eating in certain ways produced disastrous hygienic or health results. and that therefore the dietary laws before an age of medicine were an ancient Jewish system of protecting us from eating unhealthy foods and causing us to eat a healthy diet. How many of you have ever heard that argument? The Jewish dietary laws are just ancient health measures. Garbage. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Torah. As a matter of fact, the word healthy in connection with the foods that are permitted and prohibited appears nowhere in the Torah. The word that is used instead is holy. There is a difference between healthy and holy. There are certain foods that may be considered permitted, that may be considered holy, but they're not healthy for you. I think I've talked about Jewish cuisine last time and how unhealthy it can be. There are also certain kinds of foods that may not be healthy or that may not be holy. I mean, let's take backward. There are certain kinds of foods that may not be healthy, but they are not prohibited in Jewish life. In other words, certain kinds of foods which Judaism says you are allowed to eat, even though we don't think that in terms of eating it, that's a very good idea. Health is not a factor. So where did this strange idea come from? And here I'm embarrassed to admit that one of the origins of this strange idea was one of the rabbis and one of the great sages of Judaism that I hold in great esteem and great regard. And that person is Maimonides, the Rambam. You know, I value the Rambam. He says many wonderful things. Philosophical insights are outstanding. But on this one, he had this idea, and I'll quote you, Rambam, but I think he's wrong. I mean, he's absolutely wrong as far as I'm concerned, but let me read you what Rambam says. Okay, I maintain that the food which is forbidden in the Torah is unwholesome. Okay, the reason that the foods that are described in the Torah as foods which Jews should not eat, Maimonides says, can explain this to you because they are all unwholesome. They are all things that will damage your health. Okay, now Maimonides was a rationalist. He wanted to point out something interesting. It is true that when you know what the foods that Jews are and aren't allowed to eat, and certain other practices, it seems to you that the reason is health. For example, how many of you know that before Jews eat any kind of food, they are supposed to wash their hands? You know that? Okay. Many people say to you, Jews knew long before disease theory came about, knew about sanitation of hands. Baloney. Judaism's washing of hands has a little bit maybe to do with cleanliness, but it doesn't really deal with cleanliness. It has to do with holiness. It has to deal with the fact that when the priests in the temple brought offerings before the Lord, they always began by washing their hands, okay? The washing of the hands was not for the sake of health, it was for the sake of holiness. Now, yes, it is true that Jews who washed their hands several times a day in the morning when they arose, before they ate meals, it is true that because they practiced this kind of ritual, they were in many cases healthier than non-Jews who didn't practice washing. Why was it that in the 14th century, in the 1300s, when the bubonic plague, the Black Death, destroyed close to a third of the population of Europe, why was it that Jews seemed to be not as seriously affected by it as other populations? Well, it has to do with the fact Jews practiced a kind of a hygiene, and they restricted themselves from eating certain foods that were prepared or stored in certain ways that were more liable to be contaminated with these poisons, these diseases that cause the bubonic plague. If you say to me, Rabbi, do you believe there's a connection between the laws of kashrut and holiness? I would say, yes, I do. But that's not the reason for them. If God intends to bless a people through obeying the laws of holiness, it would make sense that these laws would have beneficial results. That's what Maimonides was trying to say. He was trying to say, these dietary laws that Jews practice are not just laws that God gave us because God gave us laws and God wants us to follow them, that God knew that these laws, these rituals, these customs, whether it was washing hands or eating or not eating certain kinds of foods, he knew that there were going to be health implications to it. He was right. There are health implications to it. If you eat a certain kind of diet, it will have health implications. But if you think that that was a reason for the diet, you are wrong. Okay. So any Jew who believes that in the old days, before we knew about sanitation, God gave these rules to us so that we would avoid disease and all these other terrible afflictions. But nowadays, when we know about laws of medicine, we wash our hands, and we know how to put, what do they put on your hands when you go into a hospital now?
Gloves.
Not gloves, the liquid you put on.
Oh, just yeah,
What do
anti whatever.
That's not
soap.
it. The Jews didn't know about that. This was not a kind of ancient method to reduce infection. They didn't know up until Louis Pasteur. It wasn't even known that physicians spread disease by their hands. Oftentimes, the physicians were responsible for passing disease on to people because they went from one patient to another and they touched. And someone had to say, you know something, you could cut down on disease if the physicians would just wash their hands in between eating. Even today, by the way, people who think that masking up for COVID will protect you, they're wrong. You can mask up all you want, but if you go into a room with a person who has COVID and you touch things, and after you get out of the room, you remove your mask and then you go and eat without washing your hands, you're still subject to COVID. Okay, there's nothing mysterious about that. So if you say to me,
pencil,
oh yes, if you say to me, Rabbi, is there a relationship between kashrut and health? I will say yes. It so happens that one of the benefits of the dietary laws are healthful benefits. But if you say to me, Rabbi, is health the reason that God gave us these laws? I would say to you, absolutely not. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that these laws were given to us for the sake of health. And despite the fact that Maimonides tries to make a case, and he makes a good case, and he explains why certain foods, he goes through the list, certain animals, certain kinds of animals, wild animals, animals that were killed by hunters, or animals that died of their own accord, or animals that were torn in the forest, or animals that were lower on the food chain. He may describe why he thinks that that was a reason for kashrut, that that was a benefit, that this was the reason. It was not inherent in the laws of the dietary laws. This was a side effect of keeping a kosher diet. So I have disposed of two reasons that I hope we never have to talk about again. It is not a later version of an ancient religious taboo having to do with prohibited and permissible creatures. It is not an ancient heathenistic reason, nor is it an ancient hygienic tradition. It has nothing to do with either. The laws of kashrut have to do with something entirely different. Just to give you one more citation, I did have another citation. I wanted to read it to you just to prove to you that not everybody believed what Maimonides believed. As a matter of fact, Maimonides, though he was a very great scholar and a very insightful man, many later people said Maimonides had it absolutely wrong. He said when Maimonides suggested that the dietary laws that were given may have been given for reasons of health, he was off base. For example, there is a later commentator called the Akedat Yitzchak, which says, we would do well to bear in mind that the dietary laws are not the dietary laws are not, as some have asserted, motivated by therapeutic considerations. Don't think that the dietary laws were given for health reasons. God forbid. Were that so, the Torah would be denigrated to the status of a minor medical textbook. Okay? If that were the reason for it, then really what we're saying is that God's laws, these laws of holiness of what to eat and what not to eat, are nothing more than a modern medical treatise. And worse than that, okay? That if that were the reason for it, if these ill effects could be treated with various drugs, just as there are antidotes to certain other kinds of poisons, then there would no longer be a need to follow the laws of the Torah because they would be superfluous. So if the reason was health, and you later found ways of dealing with these hazardous substances, why have the Torah anymore? The Torah is an ancient method of protecting us against these disastrous results, but nowadays we know of other things. We know about pork and trichinosis. We know that if you don't cook pork properly, you can get certain kinds of diseases. We know that shellfish and bottom living creatures retain certain kinds of chemicals, especially today, that are harmful to human health. That is not what the Torah is about. Okay, so having gone through all that, and I'm not going to cite any more examples, I'm going to go to the positive reasons. So we've spent about half our lecture talking about the wrong reasons. It's not an ancient religious enactment that was kept in Judaism, and it's not hygienic. Before I go on, let me see if some of you can offer me a reason. We talked about different reasons before. Can someone tell me why you think, what do you think the basis is for the Jewish dietary laws? Not for diets in general. I told you there are a lot of reasons people eat diets. They maintain diets to thin down, to look good, to lose weight. They maintain diets to be healthy because they have certain illnesses or genetic problems that they have to be aware of. But why do you think Judaism, the laws of kashrut, what do you think was the basis of that? And here I'm going to stop. And okay, Esther, go ahead. You unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Because God said so.
Okay. Esther's got the definitive answer.
Oh,
That is a definitive answer. You can never be wrong with Esther's answer as a Jew. It doesn't tell you a lot, but it says the reason that a Jew keeps kosher is because this was a commandment by God to the Jewish people, and that because we keep the mitzvot, we do what God said. So anybody who thinks that Esther is being simplistic is not. She's actually offered the ultimate reason. The reason why Jews keep kosher is because this is a mitzvah or a series of commandments in the Torah that God explicitly lays out and says, if you are holy and if you choose to follow a way of life that if I find acceptable, you as Jews will adhere to these dietary laws. And that's the only reason, as you are correct, it need be given. Okay, and that's what traditional Jews would say. The only reason that's necessary, the only reason that God ever gives is you're holy, you're supposed to be like me, therefore don't eat anything that's not kosher. Okay?
same as the apple in the garden.
Well, the apple in the garden becomes
same
a dog.
thing. He said so.
Why weren't Adam and Eve supposed to eat a, by the way, Esther, it's not really an apple. It never says an apple.
Well,
but the fruit, okay. What was the reason? Someone says, well, why did God prohibit man and woman from eating this fruit on this particular tree? And the answer is because he did, because that was a commandment. God said to man, I've given you all this. Now I'm giving you one command. You can enjoy it all, but don't eat that fruit. If we had been smart and wise and grateful human beings, we would never have touched that accursed fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We would never have touched it. It would have been enough for us to say, as Esther did, we are so grateful for everything that God has given us, that if God is asking us to make this one concession, not to eat the fruit of this tree, that's all I need to know. I don't need anything more. God doesn't have to explain it to me. He doesn't have to explain, is there something inherently problematic or sinful or evil in the fruit? All God's got to say is, you don't need to know why. Don't eat it, period. Okay? Good, Esther. Anybody else want to suggest another reason besides God said don't do it? Go ahead, Jerry.
Could it be also where God is establishing the symbolism?
Mm-hmm.
Because supposedly we're created in his image.
Okay.
Yet I can't see God needing a piece of prime rib, you know. So I think he was setting up symbolism for a holy and less holy.
If, Jerry, we were only spiritual beings like God, that would be an excellent answer. Because just like God doesn't need to eat, if we were only spiritual creatures and we didn't need to eat, God could say to us, look, I don't eat non-kosher food, therefore you shouldn't eat non-kosher food. And we would say to God, well, God, that's all very well and good, but you don't eat any food. You don't require nutrition. We do require nutrition. The physical part of us, like everything else, because we need nutrition, we can't be like you, never eating. We have to eat. what is the reason that even though you don't eat, we have to watch what we eat?
Leslie.
Leslie and then Jody. Go ahead, Leslie.
Well, and how does that explain? We're allowed to eat meat, we're allowed to eat cows, but there's certain parts of that we can't. It doesn't make sense then.
All right. So you're pointing out that even on what Jody is saying is it can't just,
Leslie.
Leslie is saying, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Leslie is saying is it's not just the animals we can and can't eat, but even in the animals we can eat, there are certain parts of those animals we are not allowed to eat, and certain parts of the organs or the blood or whatever that we're not allowed to eat. So so why can't we eat it? If we're allowed to eat certain kinds of animals, why are we restricted to what parts we can eat and what parts we can't eat? We're going to have to look at that, Leslie. Jody, go ahead.
I think I remember hearing once that it was to differentiate the Jews from other people.
Okay, let us go to that reason first. I was prepared to discuss this in any order you wanted, but Jody has given us one answer, and let's start with that. And Jody's answer says, okay, that the reason we are not allowed to eat certain kinds of foods and the reasons we are allowed to eat other kinds of foods, we as Jews, has to do with what I would use the fancy word is socialization. By restricting our diet, the Torah was saying, you Jews, your eating habits have to be different, so you cannot socialize too closely with people whose dietary habits are not your own, okay? And by the way, it is true. I'm not an ultra-Orthodox Jew. I'm not even an Orthodox Jew. My son, who is more religious than I am, not only keeps kosher as we do in the house, but he has a lot of other restrictions he follows. He can't eat out of the house. There are all kinds of things he cannot do. His eating is restricted because in following the Jewish dietary laws, thank you, Jody, he can only eat foods that are served in certain places, prepared by certain people, that are presented on kosher or acceptable dishes. My son is so restricted that unless he goes to a kosher restaurant or unless he finds someone who has keeps a degree of kashrut that's similar to his own, he cannot eat out. He cannot eat out. Now, those of you who I've shared meals with, not in my own home, obviously we eat kosher, but outside, know that Randy and I don't keep that level of kashrut. But if we were to, then even though I don't eat certain kinds of foods, even though I only eat certain kinds of kosher meat, the truth is by going out and eating in restaurants where I know that they don't make it proper, I'm not following the rules. But Jody is absolutely correct. And the argument is put very simply this way. The laws of kashrut are designed to serve as a barrier to separate Jews from the other nations or other peoples of the world. Now, I know that sounds exclusivistic. Some people suggest it was asocial, that it was to avoid Jews having to eat with other people. That is not why. It's not that Jews don't want to eat with other people. The fact of the matter is the dietary laws and how strict they are restrict Jews, keep Jews from casually eating with other people. Now, I'm going to ask you, Jody, what social purpose would that serve? Why would we care about eating with other people?
So that Jews will only marry other Jews.
Very good. We were prohibited from eating their bread, kosher breads, only because the rabbis were afraid we would lead to our drinking their wines. Their wines, which were often used as libations, were not kosher. They were offered up to foreign deities. We couldn't eat their bread with them because the rabbis were afraid that if we mixed with them socially and ate at the table within their breads, we would be led to drink wine with them, which would lead to the kinds of relationships we couldn't regulate. And why can't we drink their wines, apart from the fact that it might have been offered to, pour off as a libation? Because of their daughters. If we were able to eat with them and drink their wine and whatnot, it means we could socialize with them. And if you can eat with people and drink with people and socialize with people, you can end up intermarrying with people. Okay, now I'm just telling you the way that it is. The rabbis were so concerned that Jews maintain their separate identity and maintain their unique way of life. They had to come up with the system that avoided Jews mixing with other people and other traditions. And through that synchronization and through that molding, coming together, being assimilated with other people, they would come to practice other people's faiths. Now, am I saying to you that if you eat with someone who's non-Jewish, you're going to be in danger of losing your Jewishness? Not really. But the truth of the matter is that Jews who no longer observe the dietary laws, who no longer keep kosher, who not only don't eat kosher meat, but eat in restaurants, and who eat pork, and who eat shellfish, and who eat frogs' legs, and any other kind of thing, and socialize with other people, Jews who do not maintain a separate diet are more likely to mix with, to socialize with, to eat with, and eventually to establish the beliefs and mores and customs of the people with whom they are mixing. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? I don't have anything against people who are not Jewish. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to say it. Some of my best friends are not Jewish, but no.
They are.
They are. But the truth of the matter is, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the following. If I want to raise children, and I want them to have certain values, and I want them to marry Jews, and I want them to perpetuate Jewish customs and ceremonies, which are designed to make them holy, I've got to be very careful to socialize them to eat and behave in a certain way. If they think anything is fair, anything is permissible, anything is allowed in food, then they would think anything is allowable in terms of sex. They would think that anything is allowable in terms of moral or actions in war or not in war. And the truth is that Judaism is governed by a series of laws that say it is not. Jews are restricted in how they must behave. We must be holy, and that is affected as much by what we eat or don't eat than anything else. So, Jody, you are correct. If you are kosher, if you are strictly kosher, if you are meticulously kosher, the chance that you will be drawn off or be assimilated into another way of life, into another religious tradition is very, very low. First of all, you probably won't meet as many people as you would if you did not keep kosher. And the truth is that if your diet was very restricted, you would tend to socialize and mix with people who are also Jewish. So Jody is correct, okay? And that is to avoid close relationships between Jews and people among whom they live. The sages forbade the partaking of certain foods or certain dietary habits, which necessarily restricted the social context between Jewish and non-Jewish individuals. And non-Jews have resented Jews for that ever since. Why do you Jews have to separate yourself from the rest of the world? Your dietary restrictions keep you from interreacting, of being connected with the people around you. You are asocial. Your diet is asocial. By restricting what you eat and where you're allowed to eat, because if Jews can only eat kosher food prepared in a certain way, we can't eat in non-kosher homes. How can you go out to lunch? How can you go out to dinner with people? How can you socialize with people who aren't Jewish? Your Judaism makes you antisocial. Now, for a Jew like me who
It's
knows-
antisocial anyway.
who bends the rules a little bit, that may not be true. But for Jews who are meticulously kosher, even though they don't have anything against anyone who's not Jewish, their actions appear to be antisocial. They appear to be superior. I am Jewish. I cannot eat with a person who does not follow my habits. I am Jewish and I follow a certain law. And the idea of me sitting in a group of people who does not eat certain foods and does not practice certain rituals connected with eating is abhorrent to me. I can't do it. That's not why they do it. But that is what is said about Jews who keep kosher. Their rules were antisocial. They were designed to alienate Jews from the people around them, and to therefore, when people resent Jews, they resent the fact that Jews tried to live in a way that was not social to other peoples. Good, Jody.
I don't know. Oh,
Go ahead.
I think Neil has a question and
Neil-
then
oh.
Erwin.
Neil and Erwin, and then Carol. Go ahead. Neil?
I kind of look at it differently, that all of the we've discussed in the last 15 minutes is what we can't do, as opposed to the covenant, which said, you're going to be my people, okay, and that this is what you're going to do. Not that it's you can't do the other things, it's that you do what you're told to do, and that if we were put out as the representative of what God wants. So it's not elitist. It's that we're almost like the priests
Well,
as a tribe,
okay.
setting the higher standard.
Okay. There are in the Torah 613 commandments. Of those 613 commandments, are the majority negative commandments or positive commandments?
Negative.
Negative. 365 are negative. Only 248 are positive. If you are right, if being holy is a matter of doing what we're supposed to do and not a matter of avoiding what we're supposed to avoid, why are there 365 negative commandments, Neil, and only 248 positives?
That's another Zoom meeting.
Hmm?
That question is another Zoom meeting.
Well, all right.
No, but it's
Yeah.
easy. It's easy to get trapped, I think, into the because we are the children, and childlike is do this, okay, and you just childlike do it. And so, keeping kosher is just childlike doing it. Washing your hands is childlike, and what happens is that it's also, for example, washing your hands. It's the mindfulness of our relationship with God. So doing it is just staying closer to God, not necessarily moving away from God.
Okay. The priests of Israel, who are the original models of holiness, I'm saying that all the Jews are supposed to be holy, but the priests of Israel who were commanded to be holy have far more negative commandments and far more restrictions than positive restrictions. Why? Because you must eliminate from the spectrum, from the field of actions, you must eliminate the negative if you are going to perform the positive. The negations, the restrictions keep you from running afoul of what God wants you to do. Only after he restricts what you can't, only after he says, this you must not do, then there is the realm in which there are the things you can do. If you did not have all of these restrictions, Neil, which you describe as childlike, but they're not childlike at all. If these priests and later the Jewish people that were not subject to these 365 negative commandments, they would not create the space in which the 248 positive commandments could be used. You first have to eliminate the negative, and then you can do the positive. So even though you are right, ideally, we should be talking about the things that we do that make us holy. But before you can be holy, you have to separate yourself from what other people do. And because we Jews live in the world and we are affected by all the other people who live in the world, the first step for us to be a holy people is to divorce ourselves, cut ourselves off from all of the actions of other people, which we cannot perform if we are to attain our aspect of holiness. If we are going to be a holy people, Neil, we must first restrict ourselves from what we can't do in order to take on the function of being a holy people. You must first adopt the negative, and then you can go into the positive. Okay, go ahead.
As a follow-up, using the child analogy, when Hashem was done creating the world, and wait, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm sorry. When we were given the 10 Commandments, okay, and said, this is our covenant, we were a broken people that had bad habits. So yes, at that point, we weren't purely a blank slate. So it was necessary But then when you get into the whole stuff of sin and sacrifice, sin and sacrifice, sin and sacrifice, sin and sacrifice, and that became the norm, people lost sight of, wait a minute, this is how we're supposed to be.
I
And so-
understand. what
And,
you're-
what I'm saying is I think that there's some maturation
Mhm.
of Jewish mankind. Yep.
Okay, I accept that, but here's what I will say to you. As a parent, long before I ever was able to explain to my children what they should do, I had to explain to them what they should not do. Okay, and it had nothing to do with their being sinful or the truth of the matter is you have to teach no before yes. That's just the way it is. Before you sit down and explain to children why they should live the way they should live, you've got to tell them no. You don't do this. And you don't even have to tell them why. You don't do it. I
Rabbi-
tell you not to do it, you don't do it. And if
Rabbi,
they don't do it, you teach them the lesson of the hand. You know,
Rabbi, I don't disagree with you. Debbie, what was our watchword of the Reckon family? Come on, unmute and say what our watchword was for our family.
well, Deb, you want to unmute? What was the watchword, Neil?
No, and it came out that way. And by the tone of the no, you would learn a certain no meant one thing and a different no meant another thing. And no, no, no was different than no. So our entire upbringing was managed by one word.
No.
Yeah.
And by the way, my grandchildren are the same way.
No, that's not true.
Long before they understood yes, they understood no.
Well, that's true.
Our grandchildren in their development, they're a little older, but even our youngest, who is just about a year and a half old, he understands no very clearly. Yes, he doesn't understand so clearly. Why is that? I can't explain it to you
It's
except
easier to go like this than
oh,
this.
Randy says because it's easier to go like this than to go like this. Actually, it's just a nod of a head. Either one is easy. The truth of the matter is, it is easier because in life, to be protected, to be safe, we first have to know no, even before we can explain it. I don't sit down with my child and say, it's really not a good idea to run out into the street between parked cars.
Well, that's what does.
I say
Well-
no. And if my child does it, I reinforce the no.
So physiologically, it's the fight or flight. And so you are with no, you're dealing with the fight or flight.
Well, no is no. Okay, you're right. Okay, whatever. Who else did I have there, Rand?
You had
I had Neil.
Erwin.
Erwin, go ahead, and then we'll pick it to
And
Carol and
Carol.
Jerry. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Erwin.
So I have first of all an observation, and then I have a personal opinion about the kashrut laws.
Mm-hmm.
So the observation has to do with a family that I know, husband and wife. They both work at my place of employment,
Mm-hmm.
and they're Orthodox. They've never once that I can remember passed on not joining the rest of the group for a meal or going out, but they bring their own food. And furthermore, they also can be seen saying a quick prayer before the meal and a quick prayer after the meal. Nobody says anything, but that's what they do. And
Erwin, if you
they've
invited
never
me,
once that I could see pass on an opportunity to.
all right.
be
Let me
with the
ask you a
group.
question. If you invited them to their house, would you be offended if they brought their own food?
If I invite them to my house,
Would you be offended if they brought their own?
no,
food?
I would not. No,
Oh, all right. Well, then that's
absolutely
fine.
not. Because
You're
I know who they are. I
Okay.
know what they do. I would not be offended in the
All
least.
Do you remember when that happened with you?
No, there are
Lorries?
lots of people who, I mean, this is a concession. I don't know whether Erwin keeps kosher or not. I don't even know if he knows how to
Not
keep.
really.
And I don't even know if he knows the difference between certain dishes. However, I want to associate with Erwin and Susan. So I'm going to accept his invitation to his house, but I'm going to explain to him that I'm bringing my own food and I'm bringing my own dishes, and I'm not going to eat off of his dishes or eat any of his food, not because I don't like Erwin, but because I don't know that Erwin knows the rules enough to be able to eat. Now, Erwin, you can do that, but there are many people who say that I would be uncomfortable doing that. In other words, you are understanding, but how many people do you think, especially if you didn't know them, who you invited them to your house for lunch or something, and they said, fine, but I have to bring my own dishes and my own food, and I have to do certain things my way. A lot of people would just find it more comfortable to either say, I don't eat out, or, the dietary laws I follow, are impossible to do for anyone else. But you are right. You can eat and socialize with people and maintain kashrut, but it's very hard.
And I've seen him eat a lot of hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah, a lot of hard-boiled eggs. A lot of okay.
So
The
now,
second
can
you
I
had,
offer my observation on kashrut? It is my opinion that the kashrut laws have to do with holiness, and one aspect of being holy is respecting life.
Mhm.
In
Very-
other words, do not eat food that impinges on life, whether it's different, animal life or otherwise. This,
absolutely.
however, I understand that part. The part that I don't understand now is having to do with shellfish,
Okay. Okay.
because shellfish is different.
Okay. Erwin is bringing in here a second consideration. We initially talked about the idea of diets being restricted so that we don't mingle, the diets are suggested for reasons of socialization. If I eat a certain kind of food, I associate with certain kind of people. Erwin is now suggesting another motivation. Kashrut has something to do with reverence for life, Erwin is saying, and that is absolutely correct, Erwin. Okay. And Carol, I'm going to get to you in just a moment. I haven't forgotten you. Remember, originally, God did not give us permission to eat whatever we wanted. Forget that tree in the middle of the garden. When God originally created human beings, what did he give us permission to eat? Fruits and vegetables. He did not give us permission to eat animal life. We were not allowed to eat the life of anything sentient, any creature that was not vegetable in product. In other words, God is the originator of the vegetarian diet. Okay, we human beings were not to eat anything that was a living thing. And remember, the only time God makes a decision for the first 10 generations of human history, from the time of Adam and Eve up to the time of Noah, man is only permitted to eat vegetative products. When does God make an exception? You remember, Erwin?
Later on, I forget exactly when, but at some point he allows the people to eat animal products.
10 generations later, in the time of Noah, only after the flood, then I'm going to go to Carol for a minute, only after the flood, 10 generations following Adam and Eve, God says to Noah and his children, I'm making a covenant with you too, but unlike the first 10 generations who I permitted only to eat agricultural foods, permitted only to eat vegetables and fruits, I am giving you permission to take life. Okay. And we'll talk about why in a second. Carol, you had a comment.
I have a very good friend who was very religious, very Shomer Shabbos,
Mhm.
and she was kosher, and she made every attempt to do it as best she could, like 2 different wash racks for the dishwasher and things like that. And I asked her once why she does it. And so why she does it.
Mhm.
And she said, so that she can think about God more. That every time it's like a consecration to God.
Very good.
And, because I went in on we have refrigeration now and we have, all that.
Holiness
and-
is always part of his life.
Right.
Okay.
And that-
Our first reason was because Esther said, because God told us to.
Right.
Every time we eat, and the way we eat and what we eat reminds us of God, reminds us of his commandment to us, reminds us of our vocation as a holy people. Every single time we do that, that is a reason for holiness. Now, by the way, that's the best reason. Holiness, okay? Because our diet and what we eat and what we don't eat and the way in which we do it reminds us of God. Now, if we can eat with other people and socialize and come to a medium point like Randy and I do, and eat at other people's homes and eat certain foods, and we choose only certain foods, that's one level. But there are some people who are not as open as we are, and who believe that in order to live this life of holiness, you can only eat food that you are absolutely sure of, which means unless the person you are eating with observes kashrut and observes it at the same level, and you trust them implicitly not to serve you unkosher food, you know that they keep an absolutely immaculate kosher house, you can't eat with them. That's why we maintain an absolutely kosher house. My son and my daughter-in-law and my grandson couldn't eat with us if we didn't, okay? They love us, but if we didn't maintain an absolutely kosher house with separate sets of dishes and following all the rules and doing everything, as much as my son loves me and as much as he respects his mother and I, he would say politely, Dad, if we come, we'll bring our own food and we won't be able to eat enough. They could not eat with us, okay? So Carol, you are exactly right. I constantly think about God, and more importantly, every time I eat, it becomes a holy act. Okay, now let's go back for a second. Go ahead, Barbara, then we'll go back to Erwin's point. By the way, we're going to go an extra week on this subject. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Now I forgot. There, as far as, eating with people that aren't Jewish or that don't keep kashrut. I have a friend that, a couple friends that they are not Jewish, but when we go out to eat, they always say a prayer before we do eat, and they're not Jewish.
That is correct.
The other thing I was going to say is how was it decided what should be kosher and what shouldn't be kosher? And
the answer is the Torah, Barbara. The Torah, both the written law and the oral tradition, define in meticulous detail exactly the rules that govern what is kosher and what is not kosher. So if you say to me, Rabbi, is it possible to learn what is kosher and what is not kosher? I will say, yes, it's all down. It's all written. It's all explicitly stated, but you have to study it. And the only way you can know that, Barbara, is if you grow up in a kosher home and know from practice exactly what is kosher and exactly what is not, and how to eat and how not to eat, or if you have studied it. So in answer to your question, yes, non-Jews say blessings before they eat food. Jews don't have a monopoly on saying blessings, but there's a formula that we use in a way that we say these blessings before and after that is different than the way in which our non-Jewish friends recite blessings, okay? So the answer to the question is, yes, we have to learn those rules, the rules of what is acceptable and what is not, which means we have to study the Torah.
But when they, like, there's certain parts of a cow that you can't eat.
Correct. That's correct.
So how was that? Is this the same answer as far as how was that decided that that part's kosher and that part is not?
Not our culture in the Bible. Remember when Jacob is fighting with that mysterious angel in the night, and the angel touches him on the thigh, and he's wounded, and he's forever after he hobbles, he's wounded. From that comes the law that Jews are not allowed to eat any animal's sciatic nerve. Any part of the animal from the back unless the sciatic nerve is removed, you cannot eat of it. And because in this country they do not normally remove the sciatic nerve, Jews cannot eat the hind portion of animals. Cannot. Okay. Even if the animal's kosher, it was slaughtered kosher, everything else, reverence for life. The truth of the matter is, if that sciatic nerve isn't removed, you can't eat of it. And where do you learn that? Right in the Torah, the first book, the book of Genesis, and then the laws describe what that means. Okay. So the answer, Barbara, is it's explicitly stated. This isn't guesswork. The Torah says you may not eat of it. Okay. Now you can say, well, who gives the Torah authority to say that? And I would say God, but the point is, it's there. The law is there. Now let me go back one moment, and then we're going to end on Erwin's point, and then we'll come back to this next week. I'm going to allow one more week because we're not going to finish, and I'll send out the material tonight.
Tonight?
Tomorrow. Erwin said, Rabbi, we are told to have reverence for life. The very first law that God gives us is a food law. The food law. God says you can eat of any of the creatures in the garden. You can eat of anything in the garden, only the vegetables, not the animals. And what's more, even the vegetables, you can't eat of everything. There's a tree in the middle of the garden, which we know is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can't eat of that at all. Our very first laws are dietary laws. Long before God starts by telling us what we can do. I want you to be my stewards. I want you to watch over my world and protect it. But then he immediately says, however, you can't eat anything you want. You can only eat these things which I permit you to. And only of the vegetables, you can only eat everything that I permit you, but not what I don't. All right. So God, from the very beginning, restricted our diet. Now, here's the thing. I asked the question, what changed? And we'll answer this question, and then we'll stop for tonight. What changed between Adam and Eve's time and the time of Noah's sons? Why did God, after 10 generations, give human beings the permission to do what he told them not to do during the first 10 generations? Anybody want to tell me why did Adam and Eve in the 10 generations that follow, why are they permitted to eat anything they want that is vegetative, but only after the time of Noah and the sin and the flood? Only then are human beings given permission to eat meat. Why? Go ahead, Jerry.
Could be a couple of things. When the first humans were created, as you said, everything was good. Then later, after they had sinned, they're told, you're going to, till the earth in the sweat of your brow. You're going to return to dust. So I'm assuming that the wonderful sustenance and nutrition of the Garden of Eden lost a little bit in the passing of time. And maybe that was why God expanded that to animals for food.
And that's a good explanation, Jerry. But if that was the case, why didn't God, after Adam and Eve had disobeyed him and ate the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and God punished them by saying, you're now going to have to work by toil. You don't get to eat anything in the garden anymore. You got to work for it. And he said, you're going to have to not find it, and you're going to have to grow it, and you're going to have to plant it, and you're going to have to reap it. Why didn't God, if he realized that was a lot of work, why didn't he just give man and woman the permission to eat meat right away? Why did he wait 10 generations? According to you, he should have said, look, because I'm throwing you out of the garden, you don't have an easy life anymore, and you got to raise your agricultural products. I'm making a concession to you. My concession is you can eat meat. It is true, Jerry, that eating meat is a divine concession, but not for getting kicked out of the garden. It's a divine concession for something else. Go ahead, Eileen. And then Joseph.
Because after the flood and the thorough cleansing of the universe, that he started afresh, and that's when he allowed the eating of animals.
Because why? One more time, Eileen.
After the flood, and
right.
he basically cleansed everything, he started all over.
Right. But why does he now give man permission to eat meat? Theoretically, he could have started all over and kept the same rules in a place, Eileen. He could have said, all right, I'm giving you a second chance. Now let's go back. Start over. We're going back to the original. This is your food, vegetation. But God says, I'm now letting you start over, but I'm making a concession to you. You can eat meat. Why does God give the man that concession?
Different frame, different thoughts in his head. Different perception of everything now that everything is starting over.
But why? Why? What has changed? Joseph, and then back to Jerry. Go ahead, Joseph.
Well, the reason why he caused the flood was that man, through free will, became a violent tribe, killing each other, causing rapes and so
Filled with violence.
And God saw that man had this desire to be violent, and so maybe God said, well, I'm going to let him take animals, and that will satiate his need.
Very good. It is a safety valve. God recognizes that man has a destructive impulse in him. God had originally desired to control that impulse entirely. Man should not be allowed to exercise his destructive impulses for bad. But now God says, I recognize now, after 10 generations, that the soul of man constantly thirsts after what's evil, that the man's soul is violent. Man must have an outlet to express his violence. The destructive forces within man have to be given an outlet. And now God says, the outlet I give them is that man can still not kill other human beings, but I will allow them to express their aggressive nature by killing and consuming animals, okay? But God says, with one condition, you may kill animals because that is your nature, okay? You may hunt animals, you may do this, you may live off of animals. However, he says to the sons of Noah, I give you one rule. You may now eat off of other living things besides vegetation, but you must not eat of them while they are still living, okay? You must make sure they are dead. And only after their life has passed from them, only then may you eat of living things. In other words, the blood symbolizes life. The animal with its blood is a living thing that God created. God says, all right, I'm going to allow you to enjoy animals now, but you must not eat animals when their lifeblood runs through them. In other words, you can only eat them after the symbol of their life has passed, which means after they have died and that lifeblood is no longer running through them. Now, God with the Jews is going to be even stricter because he not only said to the Jewish people, you can't eat animals and eat them while they're still living. You can't eat limbs of living animals. You can't eat blood at all. Blood is symbolic of life. You Jews are not allowed to eat any kind of meat in which blood is still a part of it. A lot of the laws of the dietary laws mean not only must the animal be killed, it must be killed in a certain special way, which we'll talk about next week, but you must withdraw from the animal before you eat it, the blood of the animal, because you are not allowed to consume the animal with its life as symbolized by the blood. So what's the difference between kosher hamburger meat and regular hamburger meat? The animal that was slaughtered in a certain way. The blood was drained off, that was soaked and salted. As a Jew, even the way I cook I'm not supposed to eat rare meat. I'm supposed to boil out the blood in it. No rare steaks. Get rid of the blood, because the blood, which is symbolic of life, is sacred. I may not take an animal's life cruelly. When I kill the animal, I must make sure that it is killed before I eat of it. But as a Jew, even after I have killed it, the way I kill it, the method I slaughter it, the way I treat it before it is slaughtered, you are absolutely right, Erwin. The way in which we reverence life is that anything that has to do with animal life, the way it is lived, the way it is killed, the way it is treated, and the way in which its body and its blood are treated, now becomes a restriction. Okay, I cannot eat animals that die of themselves. I cannot eat animals that are hunted. If someone hunts a deer and kills it with a bow and arrow, or shoots it with a rifle, I can't eat the meat because it wasn't slaughtered properly. If the blood hasn't been drained off, if the meat hasn't been soaked and salted, I can't eat the meat. Why? Because every one of those actions requires me to show a reverence for life. And I will send you the material. Reverence for life. And even in killing an animal, I must say to myself, this animal which I killed because God gave me permission to eat meat, I have to recognize that it's a living thing too. I have to recognize that it has a right to live as well. And not only in Judaism, but other civilizations, in native civilizations, people believed that you had to acknowledge and thank God for the life of the animal which you were privileged to enjoy after it was dead. That you had to acknowledge that life was a gift. So, Erwin, you are correct, and I will send this out to you too. Now we add another reason. A lot of the dietary laws have to do with the ethical way in which animals are raised, slaughtered, and processed. Anything that reeks of callousness, cruelty, harm makes meat unfit for consumption. You cannot eat it. Okay? Eileen and then Jody.
I have a question about, could you just touch briefly on fish as well? For example, salmon, halibut, the fishes that we're allowed to eat with fins.
The fishes that we are allowed to eat are one thing, Eileen, and there are requirements for what they have to have. But even the way you catch fish is governed by Jewish law. You are not allowed to catch fish with a hook. It is not Jewish. You can only catch fish with a net. Any fish which is brought in on a hook, you cannot eat. Okay? Not only fish have to be kosher, but the way in which the fish is killed also has to be kosher. When I first went out fishing with my uncle, I mentioned it last week, and I went on a boat after bringing in my second fish and watching it flap and suffocated on the boat in front of me. I said, that's it, I can't do this anymore. I instinctively understood that it wasn't just the problem of fish, it was the way in which this animal was being killed. Now you're going to tell me, well, what difference does it make if it comes up in a net? It suffocates anyway. I agree. But there is something, and we will talk about it next week, inherently cruel about the hook. Just like there is something inherently cruel about trapping an animal, and where you trap it, you kill it. There is something wrong with that. Jody?
Well, are we getting back to shellfish? Because now
Sure. Sure.
Reasons why we don't eat them.
Oh, it's simple. God says you can't. When in each of the major categories, Jody, God gives criteria. He says, if you want to eat land animals, then these animals have to have what is called a cloven or a parted hoof, and they must chew the cud. You know what the cud is? It's the second stomach.
Yes.
The only animals, Jody, that have those two characteristics, a cloven hoof and chew the cud, are domesticated animals. Okay? And not all domestic. Pigs have a cloven hoof, but they don't chew the cud. They're not kosher. Horses chew the cud, but they don't have a cloven hoof. The only animals that we are permitted as Jews to eat must have both characteristics. They must have a cloven or a parted hoof, and they must chew the cud. And we will describe what them, but it basically eliminates all wild animals and a lot of other animals as well. When it comes to the fish, it says that the only fish you are allowed to eat are those that have fins and scales. It so happens that shellfish, or what we call seafood, does not possess both those characteristics. Now you're going to say to me, why did God make, I don't know why but God said you're allowed to eat fish that are drawn from the water in a proper way that have fins and scales, but animals which do not have fins and scales that live in the water, you can't eat them. And when it comes to fowl, Jody, God doesn't even give a criteria. He gives a list. He says, these are the fowls you can eat, and whatever he doesn't specifically allow us to eat, you can't eat at all. So the fact is, if you want to eat kosher buzzard, you can't. Okay? You can't eat kosher buzzard. It's not only certain fowl which are designated as kosher, and the Bible specifies them, those you can eat, whether domesticated or those that are captured and killed in a proper way. But you cannot eat any birds that are not specifically allowed in the Torah. So what you've got here is a whole dietary system that restricts our eating of animals, our eating of seafood, and our eating of fowl. So everything we eat, everything, including the lower things like locusts and whatnot, which are many of them not permissible either, are regulated by the Jewish dietary laws. What you can eat is much smaller in Jewish life than what you can't eat. There's more I can't eat in Jewish life than I can eat. Okay, Barbara, go ahead.
Rabbi,
I have,
Barbara, you're on mute again. There you go.
okay, I think I have a question as far as when you see the sign that says halal,
Yes,
halal meats,
yes.
is that similar to being kosher, or is it the way it's prepared that makes it okay to eat that and they don't eat something else?
Yeah, yes and no. All Muslims who eat halal can eat kosher food. Jews who eat only kosher food cannot eat halal. Judaism's dietary laws, Barbara, are more restrictive than Islam. It is not enough that halal observes certain rules that kashrut also follows. The laws of kashrut, the Jewish dietary laws, are much more demanding and more restrictive than even the laws of halal. So if I were to go into New York and I saw a stand, and I believe the guy who was selling it was halal meat, or he had a certificate, I couldn't eat it because the standards of halal do not rise up to the standard of kashrut. Okay, here we're going to do here is we're going to take off the okay, we're going to take off the recording. Stop recording. Stop recording was right there.